It is an honor to be here today with founders of ACTA, our founding presidents, Jerry Martin and Ann Neal, and a founding board member, Senator Hank Brown, as well as a new member of ACTA's board of directors, Heidi Ganal, who's also a member of the University of Colorado Board of Regents. I really treasure this moment to look back over 25 years of activity and success. So the first question I want to pose is, what did you see in 1995 that filled you with a sense of urgency?
What was going on at that time was the rapid politicization of university campuses. Speech codes were being enacted, one campus after another. Ho, ho, Western Civ has got to go. And that kind of thinking was washing through the curriculum. There was some good faculty trying to resist these changes, but they needed support.
Well, I was just coming out of the National Endowment for the Humanities when we got started. What we had determined over a number of years is that the threats to American higher education were actually coming from within rather than from without. And so I think it was with a desire to address academic freedom, academic accountability, and academic excellence issues that we thought now's the time.
And that, of course, was the excitement of ACTA's founding. And I wanted to ask about that mysterious meeting in the tombs of Georgetown.
Well, how appropriate that one started a higher education reform and excellence organization in a restaurant called The Tombs.
The Tombs is literally down below street level and has this kind of vaguely dark feeling, as if, whoa, who's down there? And maybe you've been consigned to it, or maybe you're plotting. And we were plotting. And I was kind of working on alums, forming the idea of National Alumni Forum, our first title. And Neil was working on how to reach out to trustees. And we would meet once a week. And the two ideas just came together.
And Hank, you teamed up in a very bipartisan way with Senator Lieberman to sound the guns, as it were, in the Hill in a op-ed.
I think Senator Lieberman epitomized what I consider to be the best quality of a senator, and that is a willingness to listen to other people and to take into account their viewpoint, even though you may not agree with it. And it was a perfect match for what we viewed as essential for higher education, where people can share controversial viewpoints, controversial ideas, not be offended, but learn from each other. Thankfully, ACTA has been very clear in advocating that kind of open society that we so value.
It's very difficult to do our jobs without ACTA. In my perception, you've taught me the right questions to ask, and you've sped up my ability to make a difference by a tremendous amount as a regent. We only have a 6-year term. We can run for a second 6-year term, but it takes a good couple years to really understand how things operate and how to make a difference. It's just a tremendous blessing to have ACTA behind me.
This has been a bad time these past few years for freedom of expression and intellectual diversity. And you've had your heart in the First Amendment for a very long time. I think I can say without exaggeration, from childhood.
It was in 1965, so I was 10 at that point. And my father was a newspaper editor with a small paper just north of Indianapolis. It was a daily, and he wrote a daily column. And I learned first and foremost about the First Amendment when the sheriff came, arrested my father for criminal contempt because he had written a column that embarrassed the judge. For years, this lawsuit went on, but I can tell you as a 10-year-old, this brought the First Amendment forward, front and center. When ACTA was formed and we decided to look at the critical foundation of any liberal education, that is being able to express one's mind, for all ideas of any kind are welcome.
One of the important things that you did with ACTA very early on was to challenge the idea that students were being allowed to form their own thoughts, free of ideological indoctrination. And in 2004, you published a essay called Politics in the Classroom.
There were those who said there was absolutely no problem of coercion in the classroom, that the classrooms were not politicized, that there was a wide and open array of ideas. And in fact, we were not sure that was the case, notwithstanding the protestations by faculty. We did undertake a survey to ask the students themselves what is happening in the classroom, and they reported back in significant numbers that there was pressure to go along with the views of the professor for fear that their grade would be lowered. The students themselves were denying that the classroom was as wide open as these faculty were saying. And that really did change the conversation.
Heidi, this is an ongoing challenge, isn't it, from your position as a regent?
It absolutely is. It's one of my top priorities. And it's much more of a challenge than I thought it would be. The devil's in the details. It's in making sure that they have the ability to push back on a faculty member in a class. And if they can't do that, they can talk about that on the faculty course questionnaire. Or it's making sure that Regent law and policy, it gives some meat to the bones of defending the students when they can't have a voice or don't have a voice. And then it even goes to the legislature, which we've been working on in Colorado, to do away with safe zones, safe spaces, and all those things that prevent free speech on campuses.
One of ACTA's heroes of intellectual freedom, Sam Abrams, particularly focused on the great ideological imbalance among administrators, particularly student life administrators, and how that really skews the nature of dialogue on campus. And that took me back to something that ACTA had been involved in very early on. One of ACTA's major campaigns has been to protect speakers on campus. It's a sad thing that we are in a situation where the number of disinvitations or shout downs has gone into the hundreds. Obviously, this kind of thing had happened in the past. It now seems to be, dare I say, a pandemic. And these battles have continued. Most recently, we came to the defense of Professor Joshua Katz at Princeton University. He had the temerity to challenge a faculty petition which demanded the formation of a faculty tribunal that could review the publications of their colleagues and punish them if they were deemed to be racist. Professor Katz pushed back. There were howls for his removal. And one of the things that was actually in his defense was that Princeton had adopted the Chicago principles of freedom of expression and was therefore forced to live by them.
What ACTA has done is spread the word and made sure that other trustees around the country are aware of the Chicago principles and are in a position to adopt them as their own board policy, that we're doing things proactively. And the Chicago principles is certainly a case of the forces of free speech and intellectual integrity gaining ground.
Hank, you did something when you were president of the University of Colorado to really build some intellectual diversity.
I thought the richness of any university's curriculum really comes in having a broad selection of courses. And Western civilization used to be a required course at the university. That was dropped, of course. But what had happened is the departments have been so diminished that it was difficult for a student who wanted to understand history to acquire even a minor in those in that important area. I think many of our students have lost sight of what was so special about America. A guarantee that there will be freedom of religion and freedom of speech. That lesson, that understanding of intellectual freedom that I think derives from that is lost if young people don't understand our history and our origin. It was why I thought Western civilization was so critical. And thankfully, the regents eventually approved, and those options are now available.
I think, Michael, Losing America's Memory, which was one of ACTA's earliest reports, was really critical in sounding the alarm bell about the growing historical illiteracy amongst our college students. When they knew Snoop Dogg better than they knew the Civil War era, when they didn't know about the separation of powers, our looking at that very early on, I think was one of the first to say colleges and universities are failing by not insisting that students have exposure to American history beyond the high school level.
I think this latest statistic is only 38% of college freshmen could pass a citizenship test. So something's not right there. And I don't think it's fair for us to say, well, that's K through 12's fault. And as we can see with what's happening in society right now, it's never been more important for young people to understand how our government works and why it's so critical that an educated citizenry is key to the process.
Certainly over the last 6 months, as we have seen various statues toppled who were remarkable individuals, but the students and the protesters didn't know who they were, didn't know what they had done.
One of the statues that was torn down in Denver, Colorado was a statue to the Union soldiers that risked their lives to end slavery in this country. Mm-hmm. Tragically, the rioters tore that statue down. Imagine disrespecting people who put their lives on the line to end slavery. It's a tragic misunderstanding or lack of understanding of history.
Yes, indeed. And one of our newest initiatives now is partnership with Braver Angels to bring parliamentary style debate to campus. And when I think of the topics that students have debated uniformly without rancor, anger, or violence, it really does put much of the rest of the nation to shame. The students have chosen topics like, should we defund the police? Or should we apply age limits to the Supreme Court? Is healthcare a human right? Should assault weapons be legal? And what's so inspiring is that we're seeing these principles of perfectly civil but very clear disagreement being writ large among the students. That's the great hope of the future. Well, I want to move now to the second of ACTA's A's, academic excellence. In other words, why students are in college to begin with. We just released the 12th edition of What Will They Learn, our core curriculum survey.
What will they learn? What a fundamental question. So actually having a study that would analyze whether or not students were exposed to key areas of study was essential to really knowing what our colleges and universities were doing.
If you look at the major ratings for universities, U.S. News and World Report, the Wall Street Journal, and others, tragically, they leave out of their analysis, for the most part, any serious look at the curriculum that's offered and the quality of courses that are offered. And often what they rate universities on are the amount of endowments that they have and a variety of other factors that have nothing whatsoever to do with quality. One of the things ACT has offered is something that doesn't exist anywhere else, and that is a serious analysis of the quality of the intellectual menu that's before the students.
The critical issue is actually having some knowledge. And I think that is what we were really trying to get at. We hear a lot about critical thinking, but if you don't know anything, it's hard to be a critical thinker. And I think that was the premise behind What Will They Learn, that we really wanted to go back to the understanding of what a liberal education would provide. That is exposure to key areas of knowledge across the spectrum, whether it was English literature or language or science or American history or math or economics, that these were critical to being an engaged and thoughtful citizen.
You know, you go to college to really learn how to think in many respects. I think things like history give you a perspective, psychology give you a perspective, arts will give you a perspective of how human beings behave. I do think it's important that people be literate in math and statistics, especially statistics. So, pursue your passion, but understand statistics. I think that we can't even imagine what the jobs will be like 10, 20 years from now. The idea that you study just one thing, become very technical and very specialized, and that will give you job security into the future, I think is no longer true. So where does that come to, like a liberal arts education? Business has to be less narrow in its communication. So it's not just like what's good for me and my company. It's like, we're really a partner with society in making things better. So that really is a critical function where liberal arts education is very important. It's learning to become many things, everything from a citizen to a good employee to a good leader.
Most parents assume when they're paying these high prices that the university professors have applied their years of experience and understanding in academia to what students need to know and be able to do. That surely this is what they are paying for when they send their children to college and university. What we discovered is that instead it was a mishmash of hundreds and thousands of courses, sometimes on horror movies, sometimes on baseball, sometimes on rap artists, as opposed to the meat and the core of what one needs.
I think it's certainly been a challenge to look at things through that perspective right now with the COVID situation, and really making sure that our resources are spent in the most effective way. And classes like America through horror films it's probably not an appropriate time to be investing in those, and better to invest in the core class. But boy, is it difficult to pry the America through horror films away from the hands of the students and the faculty.
The number one question is always the question of purpose. What's the purpose of this institution? It's a complex answer, actually. If it was a public institution, the ultimate answer is you're to serve the taxpayers of that state, or the voters of that state. And you do that, of course, by serving their students, not in the sense of being popular, but in the sense of giving them what they need to be successful in life. And successful not in some narrow way, but it's a successful life in terms of understanding things, some degree of wisdom. So you want people to have rich, full lives based on a kind of education that gives them the resources for that. I know one person said, college is their last chance to take in any culture other than popular culture. Because after that, it's all TV and the music on the radio. But this is your chance, and it's an intensive chance because you usually have them for 4 years, and you can do something with that time rather than just waste it if you have an intelligently thought through vision of what they need.
We've got a major task in front of us. One of the most disturbing findings of What Will They Learn is that only 18% of the colleges and universities in this nation, the 4-year colleges and universities, require even one foundational course in U.S. history or government. And obviously the connection between bad civic education and bad civic behavior is pretty obvious.
That's just a scandal. And people have to know the history of their country. Knowing the history of their country is not just a matter of facts and dates and so forth. It's a matter of, well, what does the Declaration of Independence say? What was the American Revolution about? And what's the Constitution about? And so they need to know that history in order to have some sense of what the United States stands for and what values they should be trying to perpetuate, because they're always at risk. And the first risk is simply being forgotten.
It is shocking how many universities have dried out their curriculum in a way that leaves a lot of the meat out and a lot of the basis for understanding our current problems. So it's not just enough to have history courses. They must be ones that have real meaning and meat for them, for the students.
I'm very glad to say that over the course of this project, there have been 747,000 unique visits to the website and 5.2 million page views. In other words, families are desperate for this information. And now we have a new piece, a database painstakingly put together of 51,000 school counselors, so that through them we can reach college-bound students and their parents with this very, very important information about how one chooses wisely. And the real payoff of all of this, 250 schools have added at least one core requirement since the project began, because that's what this is all about. When public pressure, trustee pressure, causes a school to rethink, are we really doing right by our students? I'd like to move us now to our third A, which is accountability. And that really embraces all of the issues that are so important, both in higher education governance and in the work that ACTA does. High quality education, the free exchange of ideas, affordability, access, all of these rely on the active engagement of trustees and alumni and the public.
I think almost from the beginning, we had trustees knocking on our doors. I remember we got a call early on looking for help on how to ensure academic excellence at an institution. And we quickly realized that trustees were really a subset of alumni and that we should be focusing on them since they really held the levers of power within our colleges and universities.
The trustees tend to think of themselves as working for the president. And in fact, I've talked to somebody from the Association of Governing Boards, lobbied me and said, well, the job of trustees is just to support the agenda of the president. Well, no, that's not the job of trustees. They want to support the president, but it's also to set the rules and direction for the president. And of course, correct the president if the president is going the wrong way.
You didn't tolerate malfeasance. And the Chronicle of Higher Education eventually just threw in the towel. And we have framed still on the wall of the ACTA office a long article called "A Higher Education Needler Finds Its Moment." We're very proud of that. Talk a little bit more about Governance for New Era and the way we really began to push that out into the world of governance.
Well, as you say, a higher ed needler. Because I did not have a PhD, it was very difficult often to joust with the academy. And so how wonderful it was in 2014 when we brought together an amazing group of presidents and trustees and higher ed leaders across the spectrum to talk about governance, to talk about academic accountability.
This report says the trustees need to have the last word. And it needs to be the board, the trustees of the university, who have the last word on every critical aspect of the university's performance.
These were insiders. These were individuals who were part and parcel of the educational establishment. And when they said it was time for trustees to stand up for lower costs and higher quality and greater accountability, no one could deny it. So that's been a great report that's been utilized to help trustees around the country ever since.
One of the really lovely effects of it, which we rather discovered by accident, was that the Nevada Board of Regents took the 10 questions trustees should ask, which was a part of that report, and made that part of the annual audit of every one of the campus presidents in Nevada.
I'd like to add something too that ACT has done that I think is so vital. We've seen a huge escalation in the cost of young people going to college, one that has priced many people out of the market. And it's not simply people who come from low-income families that have had a challenge. More particularly, it's middle-class families and even some upper-income families that have had a challenge. And that's because the cost of education has skyrocketed. ACTA has played a strong part in urging a new look at expenses on college campuses. From my own experience, I've found most colleges have exploded in terms of the administrative burden that they impose on students.
as a business person being in the regent role, the frustration for me is, how are you measuring success? At CU, we've taken a long, hard look at that. Things have not changed dramatically around the diversity of our student population or faculty population over the last 10 to 15 years. But we've spent millions and millions of dollars and resources on changing it. And yet our answer right now is to add more programs and add more administrators, instead of just taking a step back and really evaluating what has the return on our investment been, what's worked, what hasn't. And it's been such an incredibly difficult conversation to have.
In 2016, my colleague, Armand Alekbey, launched the Project on Administrative Cost, taking all the data that institutions report to the federal government, crunching those numbers, making the tables available to trustees and to the public, and being able to show in a glance what the ratio of expenditure on administration was relative to instruction, with some really chilling results. In some cases, I'm not exaggerating, for every dollar spent on instruction, more than $1 spent on administration.
If you're trying to do good things, the public can help. If you're increasing the instructional budget and decreasing the administrative costs, then you should want the public to know that.
One of the things I found at the University of Northern Colorado, where I served as president, was that we had only 45% of our entire budget spent on instruction and 55% spent on what I called overhead, but literally everything else. 4 years after I had been there, we had moved instruction up to over 56% of the budget and dramatically cut back overhead. We saved $7 million a year on a continuing basis simply by reducing overhead over that period of time.
I think specifically right now, we face unprecedented challenges, and the silver lining is that institutions have to adapt. They have to change now. And when we look at where we can cut expenses or create efficiencies or provide more bang for our buck, it's certainly not in more administrators. The data that I've been able to use from ACTA to present my case and to track what's going on at CU and compare it to our peers has been incredibly helpful in making a difference. And I'm not saying that I've been able to, cut and slash the administrator budget by tons, but it certainly is keeping it at the front of the conversation and allowing me some tools in my toolkit to fight that battle and get the money where we need it, is, with the students and in teaching and in the classroom.
I think sometimes the most boring conversations are the most interesting ones. And I remember when we started talking about building usage, this was key to cost issues on college campuses. And we started to look and see, as universities were building new buildings, what were they doing with the buildings they already had? And our assessment showed that they were frequently not used on Fridays. They weren't used on Mondays.
The simple fact is that many universities have not fully utilized their classroom space and optimized the productivity.
Hank and Ann, you all have been right on the front lines in trying to shake up the system of accreditation. People are recognizing what a deleterious effect that's had.
I think from the start, we looked at it as one of higher ed's dirty little secrets. It is a powerful, powerful system of agencies who literally have life and death power over institutions which rely on federal funding for their day-to-day existence. This was a system that was nominally supposed to be ensuring educational quality, when in fact we found it was raising costs. It was often homogenizing the content of higher education. And what we also found is these accreditors were beginning to undermine in really serious ways trustees' authority, and in fact interfering with governance that over which they really had no legitimate controls.
Hank, you were the one who sounded the alarm to ACTA about what the accreditor was plotting in a change that would have made the religious autonomy of Colorado Christian University and a number of other religious schools near impossible. Certainly grateful for that, and delighted that the work we then did with the presidents of a number of those schools in meeting with the Secretary of Education resulted in some much, much tighter regulations now that protect the religious autonomy of schools.
Michael, the country owes you a great debt of thanks for your leadership on that issue. What a lot of folks may not understand is that there was an element among the accreditors to have non-religious schools evaluate the curriculum and the management of religious schools. It literally was a move to put the secular control over religious universities. And it was simply a way to eliminate competition and wipe out the religious curriculums.
We have seen some real successes. I know just recently the regional monopoly, which we have long opposed because it basically stuck schools with one agency that would evaluate it. And now there is a greater latitude for schools to pick and choose amongst accreditors. So ACTA has come forward with an alternative that would be far more affordable for institutions, provide parents far more information than the implementer of the accreditor does. And I really give institutions a great deal more freedom to spend their time teaching students rather than responding to unregulated regulators.
And you had started at the very beginning of ACTA's existence an initiative to help donors make thoughtful gifts. Just today, the third edition of the Intelligent Donors Guide arrived at our offices, and we'll be sending that all around the country. You and Jerry had written the first edition of this, and it has some new stories about successful and unsuccessful philanthropy. And now, with a very generous grant from the Diana Davis Spencer Foundation, we have really ramped up the Fund for Academic Renewal. And again, I'm delighted to share the news that we have advised on over $100 million of higher education philanthropy.
I think that, Anne, the work that you did, and Michael, the work you continue to do to help donors give in a way that's meaningful. And as I like to say, not feeding the beast, the wrong things that are happening, is the most impactful thing we can do to push forward higher ed into the future.
We get help sometimes from foundations as well. I think about the really important work that the Beasley Foundation, led by our friend Judge Bray, did in commissioning a report from us on the core curriculum requirements of the Virginia colleges and universities that the foundation supports. That foundation declared a moratorium on all college and university funding until such time as a school earned an ACTA A.
This really points up the enormous impact that ACTA has had, because they've been willing to step forward and shine a bright light on these crises in higher education when no one else would. And the fact is, they've had a series of great victories on campuses across the country simply because they were willing to stand up and speak up.
I think ACTA has a wonderful way of paring down all of the murkiness and the cloudy discussion of many things that are happening on campus and really getting back to the fundamentals.
Yes.
And it gets back to what will they learn, the 3 A's, academic excellence, academic freedom, and accountability, to really get trustees and parents to look at first principles.
There are a lot of organizations that have similar concerns who raise a lot of money by just expressing anger, by reporting horror stories that may or may not actually be accurate, and expressing a lot of anger. And they achieve nothing except anger is a big motivator for donors. Everybody knows that. The goal from the day one was always to achieve a change on the ground, change that will benefit the students, benefit the faculty, benefit the intellectual life of academia.
Sometimes we need to add whatever will work. If you want us there on campus, we'll be there on campus. If you want us to stay very much in the shadows, we'll stay in the shadows. But this is an important cause, and the battle has to be won.
Hi, I'm Kathy Merrill Williams, and it's a joy to be here and present this award named after my father. My father was a passionate defender of academic freedom and one of the founding board members of ACTA, and very much appreciated the cornerstone of higher education and what ACTA stands for.
I appreciate the work that ACTA does each and every day to protect freedom on campuses. We have the best university system in the world, but it is threatened by the narrowing of thought on these campuses. But for ACTA, it would be far worse.
Today's students are going to be tomorrow's leaders, and the process of higher education is the process through which they're exposed to different ideas. So it is the job of organizations like ACTA to hold schools accountable, to make sure that schools understand that those students are there to learn. And without groups like ACTA, who's going to step in when a university steps out of line, when a university decides that your science credit is covered by a chemistry of cooking class, and you're depriving that student of knowledge, you're depriving that student of the ability to be exposed to something new, to have a basic foundation in a wide variety of areas.
How diverse are we intellectually? What is our ratio of administrative to teaching positions? Why are we charging students so much, and what are we doing to hold those costs down? And incidentally, can you prove to me that they're learning anything for all that money? ACTA has been courageously posing these and other important questions now for better than 2 decades, and please press on. Signs of better days are visible.